I'm Greg Johnson. Welcome to Countercurrents Radio. This is our Saturday stream. I woke up today and discovered that Venezuela was burning and that it was a bad day for BRICS. And I think it's kind of a complicated thing. I'm not 100% sure what to think about this, but there are definitely some upsides to it. There are definitely certain people who are seething, which makes me happy. It definitely has all kinds of interesting geopolitical implications down the road, most of which I think are positive. So that makes me happy. And I have on the show with me Brandon Martinez. Brandon, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy New Year to you too. This is actually a great way to start the year, and this is right in your wheelhouse. What's happening
Yeah.
in Venezuela and all the takes going on about it. So let's just
Mm.
begin with that. And folks, if you have questions out there, send them through Entropy. We love your super chats; they get read first. And Entropy has stood by us for, well, gosh, it's going on 7 years since we were deplatformed from the global credit card processing industry. And Entropy is the only company that stayed with us the whole time and has been willing to process donations for us. So we very much appreciate that. So go to entropystream.live/countercurrents, no hyphen. It's across the bottom of the screen, and send your questions in. And my big question is to Brandon, just to start it off. What do you think about this Venezuela strike?
It was pretty surprising. I wasn't expecting it. It looks to be the cleanest regime change that's ever occurred. It was a couple strikes, and they grabbed Maduro, and he's on a plane, and he's on his way to America, and very few civilian casualties, from what I can see. So, from that perspective, it's not bad because you don't want a quagmire. You don't want to get into a massive conflagration, but also this kind of rook in the BRICS arsenal, I guess, on the BRICS chessboard. The rook, the Venezuelan regime, is over, and it was almost like the Syria thing. You know, Assad just gave up. He barely even put up a fight, and it's almost like these guys kind of they rule for years and years and years, and they become kind of tired and boring and bland, and the enthusiasm for their revolution just evaporates overnight. And that's pretty much, it seems like that's what's happening here. And I was seeing videos of people celebrating in the streets in Caracas and so on. From the Spanish perspective, like every right winger in Spain hates Maduro because Maduro is the patron saint of the far left in Spain. Like all the far leftists love Maduro. You can see them going to Venezuela and meeting with him and praising him and glazing him 24/7. So he's essentially like the sugar daddy of the far left in Spain and across Latin America. So all those guys are celebrating. They hated that guy. Very few people liked him. I mean, the only people who liked him are these, old school commies, George Galloway type of people who are clinging on to some kind of old Soviet alliance that will challenge Western hegemony or something like that, right? Abby Martin, these types of people. Basically, all Marxists, all socialists, and all leftists are seething. But Maduro was anti-white. He was anti-Western. He supported BLM. He was funding leftists in the West. He's no friend of ours. And the only thing I can see from some kind of schizo sectors is, oh, he's anti-Israel and anti-Zionist. Therefore, he's good. Yeah, every communist in the world is anti-Zionist. Every far leftist in the world, including here in Spain, is anti-Zionist because they're anti-racist and they are anti-nationalist. So they see Zionism as sort of an extension of racist nationalism. But how exactly is that congruent with like what we believe in terms of nationalism in the West? I mean, they're against that too. So it's yeah, that's just the standard communist left wing position. Yeah,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Yeah. Well, okay. First of all, I want to circle back to something you said about BRICS. And that's, of course, this alternative to the West, this construct of something you said
It's
of what Brazil, Russia, India, China's in there. And of course, Venezuela didn't get a letter, apparently. It's BRICS plus, I guess, and Venezuela was the plus. But they were very much aligned with this, and it's kind of this multipolarist meme that they're going to get away from dollar hegemony and they're going to be socialist, and basically a lot of it just consists of regimes that are Iran's part of it, that are post-Marxist, sort of quasi-Marxist, or basically anti-Western, anti-Zionist, and they've got a bone to pick with America and American hegemony and all that. So yeah, they've been having a bad time in the last couple of years, uh, and basically it all goes back to the invasion of Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I thought that Russia had the second most powerful military in the world. And I thought, okay, I hope my friends get out of there quick. I seriously thought it was going to be over in a few days, and so apparently did Putin. And in fact, the people who are doing all the military planning were planning for it to be over in a few days, and obviously their intelligence was extremely weak. I was just going by memes, basically. I was just looking at memes and thinking, well, it can't all be a Potemkin village or a Putin village, right? A Putin army. There's got to be something to it, and yet it turned out that no, they didn't have what it takes to conquer Ukraine, a country much smaller than itself. They managed to occupy and wreck about 20% of the territory of Ukraine, but they couldn't seize the whole country. And they are going on 4 years now of their 3 day glorious special military regime change operation. They have gone all in on this. They have lost integration with the global economy. They are giving their oil out at bargain basement prices. They are increasingly dependent on China. And they are cleaning out prisons and insane asylums and shipping people to the front, right? It's a mess. They've gone all in on it. They were running on Soviet era equipment and stockpiles, and these are being depleted. They didn't even really build up new industries because I thought this would be a cakewalk, and they've been shown to be extremely hollow and weak. And a lot of other regimes, though, were counting on Russia and the meme of Russia strong, right, to back them up, and that includes Iran, that includes Syria, Armenia to some extent, Venezuela, and we have seen Venezuela just removed from the chessboard, just like Syria was removed last year or the year before. I guess it was close to the end of last year or the year before last, and it was an ignominious collapse, and this is an ignominious collapse. It's the quickest regime change I've ever seen, the quickest special military operation I've ever seen. It must be terribly humiliating to the Russians to see how much better handled this was and how much more effective it was. And Armenia was basically humiliated, Armenia being something of a client state of Russia, in their war with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno Karabakh region, which has now basically been absorbed back into Azerbaijan. And the Armenians, I guess, have basically had to flee. So Russia is not a very good ally, and the reason they're not a very good ally is they, first of all, they put their
All social.
image to the test in Ukraine, and the world found that the image was hollow, except for some diehards on the far right internet who still think that Russia is invincible, right? And they also increasingly have bet the store. They've been consuming their capital. their military capital, their political capital. And that means that they have not been able to be a reliable ally to these countries that the United States is now removing from the chessboard. I wonder
Yeah,
if Iran next.
even they're not a good ally even to Iran, right? Remember
Yeah.
when Israel bombed Iran and Putin just shrugged his shoulders. He's like, "So what?" Someone asked him, "Hey, are
Yeah.
you going to intervene?" He's like, "No. Why would you think that?" And he said, "Well,
Yeah.
the Israelis, we have relations with them as well." So he's just using them to get what he wants, which is the Iranian
Hmm.
drones to attack Ukraine. He's using the Venezuelans to get oil, whatever he needs from them. But he'll throw them under the bus quicker than you can blink because he doesn't truly care about any of these people. They're not true allies.
Yeah,
They're
and
not true friends.
he can't really help Venezuela at this point. But
Yeah.
boy, they were willing to sell a whole bunch of military equipment, which was a damp squib. And I think a lot of their military stockpiles will probably end up being fired at them somewhere in eastern Ukraine
Mm-hmm.
in the near future, which would be poetic justice, quite frankly. So this is really bad for Russia. Another way in which this is really bad for Russia has to do with oil prices, the global oil market, because let's just assume that this goes swimmingly well, as Trump's been hoping, and that America basically can just take control of Venezuela without its oil fields being going up in flames. I hope they're paying attention to that they're not going to let it be sabotaged. Let's say that they could just seize the oil industry of Venezuela, which has I think, the world's largest oil reserves. I mean, bigger than any other country. Let's just say that they start pumping, drilling, and they dramatically lower world oil prices. That would be the smart move for Trump. It would be the best way to fight inflation, honestly. And he's not been able to really tame that. And it would be the best way to jumpstart the American economy. It's a very tempting target. If that's what he's thinking, it's a very tempting target. But one of the other things that it'll do is it will basically put Russia in a very, very tough place because Russia is dependent on oil exports. And if global oil prices crash, uh, Russia's balance of payments is going to be even worse than it is. And they're simply
Mm-hmm.
going to be, I think, forced out of the war, for one thing, because the only way they're going to get out of economic sanctions and back into the global economy is basically to get out of Ukraine. Honestly, uh, I
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
hope that I
this
hope that
could be
happens.
this could be the catalyst to that. I mean, I think last week or something, Trump was back trying to get them to negotiate again. Didn't succeed. He's kind of hinting that Putin is the obstacle to peace, and that's a fact. Putin is the main obstacle to peace because he refuses to make any kind of deal in which Ukraine has security guarantees, real security guarantees, which I believe is membership with NATO. He won't accept that, but anything less than that is not a real guarantee. They already had,
Hmm.
the Budapest Memorandum, which was a security guarantee, and Putin steamrolled it. He didn't give a damn because it's not Article 5 of NATO. And that's why he's so desperate to keep them out of NATO, despite the fact that going back to 2002 and 2005, you can see statements from Putin where he's green lighting NATO expansion. He says, I expect them to get involved with NATO. It's their choice. Lavrov said, it's their choice. They're free countries. They can get NATO. And then Finland gets into NATO. And then Putin says, we don't got an issue with that. It's not a threat to us. Okay, then why'd you invade Ukraine, you idiot? Right? So he's
Hmm.
Putin just flip
Well,
flopping now. So
well, that was a. I always thought that was a fake pretext. Frankly,
yeah, it was.
it was a fake pretext because before 2013, it wasn't even a popular idea in Ukraine. Most Ukrainians were very opposed to being in NATO. They wanted to be in the EU. That was a very popular view, but not in NATO. And then once the border conflict started in 2014, Ukraine couldn't get into NATO anyway, given NATO's existing rules, because they have basically an ongoing conflict on their territory, and NATO wouldn't let them in. Uh, Beyond that, there are countries within NATO that probably would have vetoed them, like Hungary,
They are.
basically at Putin's behest. And that is a very good reason to think, therefore, that it was never a live option for Ukraine to go into NATO anyway. So, what's this talk of NATO encroachment? That was just bait for boobs in the West, low information,
Mm.
opiners,
Yeah.
low information pundits in the West, to give them some kind of plausible thing that's sort of analogous to, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember that was
Mm.
being trotted out as an analogy, but it wasn't really the thing, and it was very clear that it wasn't the Donbass genocide. It wasn't the poor Russian speakers, because they didn't want to stop there. They basically think Ukraine is a made up country, an illegitimate country with false consciousness. It's really Russian territory, and they want to take it all back. That was clearly their goal with this war. And they put out a whole bunch of contradictory pretexts, basically to confuse Westerners and get them on their side to some extent.
Yeah.
And it's worked, and these dumb memes still circulate. Oh, NATO expansion. I love
Yeah.
the
It's just
parodies of this now.
there's like it's like one of those wheels at the game show, and he just spins the wheel, and here it's NATO expansion, then it's Donbass genocide, and then it's neo-Nazism in Ukraine. So it's
Mm-hmm.
they're all pretexts. He just adds. It's like a pile, or it's like a goodie bag of pretexts, and he dips in, and he's got a bunch of them to pull from to use, and yeah, the rubes just parrot the crap. All of it fake, all of it lies. No Donbass genocide. What are you talking about? 21 deaths in 2021 is a genocide on both sides. I mean, even Prigozhin, before he attempted to do a rebellion, he says that's fake. He says there's barely any fighting going on here. What are you talking about, a genocide? NATO's going to invade Russia through Ukraine? They're not even in NATO. So it's all pretext. You're right. Yeah, it's just Lebensraum. It's Russian Lebensraum. It's expansion. Take all the rich resources of Ukraine. Ukraine's always been coveted territory for empire. Hitler wanted to go into Ukraine for that reason, to create Lebensraum and take the fertile soil, and Putin wants to go in for that reason as well. It's a lot of territory he wants to add to the empire. So that's the real reason. But as far as this Venezuela thing goes, yeah, I think Trump could also be doing this as a means to put pressure back on Putin to end the war. Because without Maduro was one of his only strong allies in the world. Other than Iran and China, you had Maduro. Maduro allowed Russian ships to dock in Venezuela. It's basically a hangover from the Castro regime, the Chavez. It's like the last kind of hangover of Latin American Marxism, this anti-Yankee kind of Marxism. So if you're an American, I don't see why you would like that government. It's extremely hostile to America in a generic sense, to Americans in a generic sense. It's pro-left, pro anything that's disruptive in America. BLM, for example, met with Maduro. And so if unless you're a self-hating American, and there's many of those on the far right, by the way, self-hating Americans who want to see their country fail and lose and what have you, there's no reason to support that regime. And look, it's not going to be a massive war. I mean, Trump is pretty, like, you got to give him some credit. He's pretty smooth with this stuff. Like, in the Iranian thing, just dropped a couple bombs and left. With this thing, dropped a couple bombs, got Maduro and left. He's not creating massive new conflagrations, to his credit. He's doing precision strikes. This is he's utilizing soft power and hard power when he needs to, and it could bring an end to the war in Ukraine if Putin takes it as a sign that time's up, man. Like, there's no more funny business here. Trump's not really messing around here. I don't think Trump has the balls to do anything like that in Russia, though, Unfortunately, it would
Yeah,
be glorious. I posted a meme with Putin getting arrested, but I don't think.
there are a lot of those. Yeah.
Yeah,
So let's talk about the various motives here of Trump. The drug thing, is that even real?
yeah. To some extent, there's some narco trafficking in Venezuela for sure. I think the government is probably involved in that. You hear a lot of chatter about that in Spain. They call Maduro a narcotraficante, right? So that's probably how they're financing some of their stuff in Venezuela because of the sanctions and all that, right? Might be exaggerated to some extent by Trump just to do this.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, there are more than a million Venezuelans who have fled the country under Maduro because basically they have a collapsed, dysfunctional socialist economy. And 500,000 of them are in America. There are tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of them in other parts of Latin America. I know a lot in Chile.
In Spain,
I'm
though,
sure
there's
there's
so many in
yeah,
Spain.
yeah. Apparently, they're notoriously obnoxious people too. They're not good neighbors. The Chileans hate them. A lot of them are involved in criminal activity in America. And one upside of this is we can start, I hope, repatriating these people. This is one of the reasons
100%.
why I sort of threw up my hands and said, okay, Assad's gone, whatever. Now there's absolutely no excuse to have these refugees here. We need to send them back. And interestingly, practically every European country immediately stopped processing or asylum applications from Syrians at that point. It was like, oh, we've got an excuse. We've got enough. Uh, he's out. We're just going to put a smiley face on who's ever in the in office there and start repatriating these people. And I think some of them are actually going back. They need to be nudged out, obviously, because they're mostly on welfare wherever they end up. But it would be nice to start sending Venezuelans back. That would be a very positive thing for Americans. Cheaper oil, returning Venezuelans, and I especially am concerned with. I would like the Ukraine war to end. What are some of the other motives for this? I mean, the drug thing. Well, if he really is involved in drugs, even in a minor way, that's good enough excuse to knock somebody off. They did it with Noriega. Uh, what about the Israel angle? I notice a lot of people in the sort of Groyper camp, up
Mm.
until this morning when Nick woke up sometime afternoon, I think, in his time and got the news and decided to and read the room and decided to be a patriotard and go America. Just yesterday
Right.
they were going on about how you know this is all Israeli op. The Maduro thing. It's all an
Everything
Israeli
is.
op. Yeah, there is apparently some truth to the claim that radical Islamic terrorist groups like Hamas and other groups like that have supporters in Venezuela. They use Venezuela to raise money and things like that. They probably have bank accounts there. Whatever. There is some truth to this, uh,
Yeah,
and of course,
Maduro's anti-Zionist. He's a
yeah.
Marxist, so of course he's anti-Zionist. Every Marxist is anti-Zionist. So I'm sure the Israelis are happy about it because he's not their friend. He's an ally to Iran, an ally
Mhm.
to China. So yeah, they're probably happy about it, but I don't think that's a massive factor. Trump has been against Maduro since the beginning, from like 2016 onwards. Like he'd always disliked him. He disliked Maduro for
Mhm.
being an
Mhm.
anti-American zealot, and yeah, I mean, there could be something there, but it's just one of multiple factors here. I think the main thing is just geopolitical hegemony in that region and taking out an anti-American regime, right? It's the same reason America was against Cuba for decades and had an embargo against Cuba. Yeah, Cuba's anti-Israel. I don't think that's the main reason America was embargoing Cuba. So these are natural alignments. You know, it's like it just goes back to the Cold War. Israel aligned itself with the West. Uh, the communist Russia initially recognized Israel as a state. However, within a few years, they realized Israel was going to become America's main ally. So they quickly turned against Israel and they launched like a 50-year crusade against Zionism, right? They pushed pro Arab policies. They were arming Nasser and the Syrians and the PLO, and Mao Zedong supported that. Yeah, that's just standard kind of Cold War geopolitics, right? And so even today, the Marxists see Israel as like a appendage of the American empire. This is the Chomsky line, and you can hear Maduro say that too. They view Israel as white supremacy in the Middle East and so on, right? This is classic left wing stuff, and that's why just going fully all in on obsessive anti-Zionism is like there's valid critiques to make of the lobby and meddling and stuff like that. But then when it becomes obsessive, you notice the gravitational pull towards third worldism always happens that way. When you become obsessed with trying to like pin everything on them and make that the center point, centering them as like the cause of everything or the main enemy, you start to drift towards, oh, maybe the Muslims are our friends, and maybe these third world communists are our friends, and you start placing that above your own side, right? So you see how it's problematic, and Fuentes fell right into that trap. Fuentes, for 3 years, was pushing Muslim alliances. He was consorting with Sniko and Sulaiman Ahmed, that psychotic Muslim Pakistani guy, and other Muslims like Tate, and he started mouthing their talking point. He started to pander to them, right? He's like, Muslims ain't so bad. Islam ain't so bad. It's Israel. We're aligned against Israel. It's just the Israel lobby that's bad, right? Don't worry about the Pakistani grooming gangs, and don't worry about Islamic terrorism. Don't worry about the left. Don't fight the progressive left anymore because they're against Israel, right? So we're aligned with the left now. So do you see how it just captures your mind and turns you into a leftist more or less, and makes you forget everything that's important?
I think it's very interesting that Fuentes has flip-flopped on this. I guess that should come as no surprise to me because I don't think he has any principles. And if you've got principles, then you can sort of read people's minds. A lot of his followers, before he woke up and logged on, thought they could read his mind and thought, okay, well, he's going to be in the BRICS camp, the Third Worldist camp, and they discovered no, he read the room, and he's for the American empire now. And we've seen signs of this recently in other shows. I do think he's very ambitious. He's a power worshiper. He feels like he's getting close to being more mainstream, and so a lot of his points are now in that gravitational force of the mainstream. It's sort of like this ghastly uh, transformation of Richard Spencer. You know, basically they feel empowered by parroting ideas that are held by the establishment. And so, oh, they're for empire now, but they're sort of, center right in their imperialism, right? But they're for the empire now. They're for the system, and he seems to be moving in that direction since he's gotten more mainstream attention. The other day, I saw he was saying we must be kinder to criminals. It's like, what the hell? Uh, so, I guess this is basically Fuentes reinventing himself because he feels like, okay, I can be a player. How can I be a player? Well, basically by being a courtier or by being an echo of the positions that powerful people take. And it's a LARP, basically. It's literally a LARP. You play along and parrot the opinions of the powerful, and therefore you feel like you're a player. And I think it's extremely immature, but that seems to be the direction he's moving in. But it was very funny watching and waiting for him to log on, because these people didn't know what to think, and most of them were silent. But some that stuck their necks out, I think, are having to retreat now because Fuente seems to be just fine with this.
Yeah, that's pretty shocking because he's been banking on the anti-Trump stuff for the past 2 years. And so you'd
Hmm.
think, well, if you're doing anti-Trump, well, you're just going to oppose him on this too. Embellish the Israel angle to it, say he's just bought and the same shit. I mean, he was getting pushback when he refused to go along with that schizo claim that Charlie Kirk was killed by Israel, and he finally got some sense and is like, okay, this is cooked here, right? And then the nut jobs in his audience, because he's cultivated a whole faction of nut jobs, they turned on him. They said, "You're bought 7K, man, 7K per post. You're not blaming Israel for the Charlie Kirk assassination, like the Candace Owens tier stuff." And then because he got pushback on that, he started to be pushed a little bit further away from them, right? So he's like, "Okay, yeah, you guys really are third worldists." He was cultivating a third worldist audience for 2 years, then realized they're all retarded. They're all retarded Muslims, right? They're all like, you can imagine a ton of his audience now, a bunch of Pakistanis, and there's actually evidence of that. Pakistanis are like super chatting him and stuff, right? Because of the like all they care about is that Israel takes, right? And now he's realizing that they hate the West. They're anti-white. They're using him. That's essentially what it is. The Muslims will use these Westerners who they think are sympathetic to Palestine or anti-Zionist for their own objectives, which is Islamic expansion. They're never going to take up your issues, right? You'll never find someone like Suleiman Ahmed, someone like Sneeko start taking up the white man's issues or the Europe's issues with regards to mass immigration, with regards to the rape gangs, with regards to Islamization. They'll never defend us on those points. They'll never take up those issues. They're very happy to amplify you if you're taking up their issues, though. And I noticed this. I noticed they're doing this. They're trying to make useful idiots out of white people in the West who are stupid enough to buy into the idea that those people can be allies. And they milk them for all that they're worth, and then they throw them in the trash as soon as they take their own side. Right? That happened to me. I used to be into those circles, that whole anti-Zionism thing, and that was exactly the same thing. As soon as I started to get more aware of and started to talk about the immigration issue, Islam in Europe, the problems with Muslims, they turn on you instantly. Instantly. You're their hero. They're a big fan, and now you're an enemy. Now you're a Zionist, right? So basically, like the whole thing has become a joke. It's like anyone who's not bootlicking Islam, they just immediately accuse of being a Zionist. That term has no meaning anymore. It's like the term
Hmm.
anti-Semite. The term anti-Semite has no meaning because it's so overused by like liberal left-wing Jews that it's irrelevant. And now the term Zionist is so overused and thrown about and bandied about by these Pakistani keyboard warriors and just idiots in the West. No meaning. Like you don't even have to be that. Like you could literally be for cutting off ties with Israel completely or rescinding all foreign aid. And they'll just call you a Zionist anyway if you criticize Islam. It's a shaming tactic. It's an Islamic shaming ritual.
Right. So another tie between Venezuela and one of America's global rivals is, of course, the China-Venezuela relationship, which was just being strengthened the very day that Maduro got, basically murked. And I think that's clearly a part of America's geopolitical calculus here too. So the U.S. is in one stroke, they are trying to strengthen themselves vis-a-vis the BRICS countries, including China. And I think China is the principal one in their calculations, frankly. I think China gets a lot of its oil from Venezuela. I think the United States wants oil prices to go down, and they're going to do that. I think that's economically reasonable for the United States. It's also going to put Russia uh, out of the war, probably, if it goes through. There's also just the ideological aspect of it. Uh, Venezuela is just an enemy. I mean, they're clearly an enemy of the United States, ideologically an enemy of the United States. They've been dumping their own people in the United States. They're communists, basically, or Marxist aligned. And those are a lot of good reasons, honestly. And as far as I'm concerned, though, uh, those reasons, this is all in the realm of realpolitik, and I would like to talk about international law and norms in a bit. But within the realm of realpolitik, which we were just talking about now, the fact that this makes some Jews happy is not enough of a poison pill for me to look at this, or most normies to look at this from a real political point of view and say, oh, this is a horrible thing, and it's really all about Israel. That's sort of the schizo take on the far right. It's really all about Israel, and we can't like this in any way because it might make some Jews happy, and
Yeah.
that I think is just a kind of a dumb attitude that we have on the part of a lot of people who basically they've been trained in the kind of Pavlovian way to start drooling and raving and barking when the word Jew is mentioned. Oh, there's a Jew involved, and they start hyperventilating. Recently, an example of this had to do with the Somali business in the United States. It's now actually being put out by people, and these, of course, they sound like Fuentes people. They also sound like TRS people, saying this talk about billions and billions, historically massive amounts of fraud committed by the Somali gangsters, basically, in Minnesota. It's also happening in Ohio. It happens wherever there are Somalis because that's how these people live. Okay, this fraud is just a distraction from Israel. They want to say that. No, this is a distraction from Israel. Fuentes was doing that just
Oh
the other
God.
day. And my reaction to this is very simple. Look,
No, Israel's
I
just a
have enough.
distraction from the Somali fraud.
Yeah, yeah. Israel is actually like these people's distraction from
Yeah.
reality when you get right
Yeah.
down to it. Like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't have any nuance here. We can't have multiple variables. We have to simplify everything to this one factor. They're literally what is called a simpleton about this. They're simple-minded. They've got one focus. That's all they can handle. One variable. It's a low IQ, hyper focused, paranoid, and a sectarian mentality that I'm seeing here. Because when I look at this, I think, well, gee, I've got enough cells in my brain and enough hate in my heart to actually entertain the possibility that I have many enemies and they all need to be dealt with. They all need to be opposed. And the idea, oh no, we can't allow people to focus in on this because that focuses away from our single mania,
Yeah.
our simpleton mania about Israel is absurd. And it's fascinating to me. Randy Fine, fat Zionist from down in Florida, the closest thing to a mountain in that swampy, flat state is Randy Fine. Randy Fine is just a genocidal Zionist freak. Randy Fine put out on X that he thinks the entire Somalian community should be denaturalized and remigrated. I looked at this and I said,
Base.
This is fantastic. And then I looked and saw it was Randy Fine, and I thought, oh, should I feel bad? Should I
Right.
take that back? Should I say, oh, this is not fantastic anymore? And what's Randy Fine's angle here? Because he's got an angle. I mean, he's a smart guy. I'm a smart guy. I work all the angles. Jews have lots of angles. Obviously, Randy Fine is thinking, if we can get the United States to sign off on denaturalizing and deporting an entire community as a group, that's going to ease the way for us. That'll be a precedent for us ethnically cleansing our enemies from our territory, Gaza, whatever. I'm sure that's what he's thinking. And I'm sure he's rubbing his hands together in glee. That's not enough to make me think, okay, well, I guess because some Jews might be excited about this, I guess we can't solve our problems in America because that might tempt Jews to solve their problems in Israel. That is the
Yeah.
absolutely pathological line of thinking that we see with these schizoid Judeo-centric simpletons, and it's just got to stop.
Yeah, it's mind rot. It's mind rot. I've been calling it out for years, for at least a year now. I've seen this. These are people that will tell you that the Islamification of Europe doesn't matter because they hate Israel and we need them, and we're gonna team up with them to fight Zog. I heard Fuentes say that. Like when he fell into that trap, he was saying that. He's like, I'd rather be with the Browns on this one, and it doesn't actually play out that way. How it plays out is they continue Islamizing the West, they continue their little rape of the West, and then there's just less pro-Israel policies with them here, and then they keep growing. They keep inviting more of their extended families over, and then they take over the West. See, they're just playing you, right? The Muslims are playing these people. They have their own agendas. They have their own objectives. They're using that Israel issue to dupe, like, on the one hand, left wing white people, left wing people in the West who sympathize with them for the reason of anti colonialism, that while they're colonizing us. See, so those are the left wing dupes, but then there's these right wing dupes who are so monomaniacally focused on one issue. And why are they so monomaniacally focused on that one issue? Like, I guarantee you, like, most of the immigrants into Europe are not from war zones that were in the vicinity of Israel, right? Like, most of them are Moroccans, Pakistanis, Indians, Algerians, and Africans. They're not even from Iraq. Like, the majority of the people coming to the West are not from Afghanistan or Iraq. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And the majority of them aren't. Like in Germany, the big immigrant group are Turks, and they're not involved in any wars. So it's just wrong analysis. Everything comes back to that, right? Everything has to be viewed through that lens, even when it's not relevant. I mean, those people are so psychotic and delusional that they try to claim that that's the reason for the Ukraine war. Zelensky in Israel did it. What are you talking about? Vladimir Putin invaded for his own geopolitical reasons that had nothing to do with Israel or Zionism, right? And Israel was neutral during the conflict. But they're so delusional, they're so obsessive that if they can find one of that group in it, then that it becomes all about that, even when there's so many other factors and motives involved. And it's just become a mind rot, really. And you're seeing it with Candace Owens, you're seeing it with Dan Bilzerian, Jake Shields, these people. You notice, like, on X, you go on X, and whenever somebody criticizes Islam and in the West and Islamization, you'll see Jake Shields and Bilzerian right under that comment saying, no, actually, it's about Israel. Actually, no, Judaism. Actually, no, Jews. To every fucking time. It's like you're not allowed to criticize any other group other than that one. Okay,
Yeah.
so stop criticizing black people then. Okay, stop criticizing transgenders then. Nobody can be criticized except that one group of people. That's their worldview
Mhm.
at this point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's fascinating to me that Well, some of these people clearly are quite low IQ. Jake Shields seems nice enough, but he doesn't seem terribly bright to me, for instance. Uh,
But he's
uh, I'm
injecting
just
his
trying to.
garbage into these scenes and these circles, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I just kind of struggle to understand the different psychologies here. Part of it is just a skill set. It's not having the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time, to
Mm.
think in non-simple binary terms, to recognize, well, actually, you can have more than one enemy, right? Actually, the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. These are all sort of little IQ tests that they're not passing, or they're kind of wavering on. I guess that's part of it. Another part of it is wishful thinking, because I do really believe that the QAnon phenomenon, for instance, was nursed by wishful thinking. It was nursed by the hope that somewhere in the world there are powerful people on our side, that we have secret friends in this world, which is unfortunately not true. There weren't patriots in charge during the first Trump administration or during the Biden interregnum. That was all nonsense. And we don't have a friend in the Kremlin. We don't have a friend in the Ummah, right? We don't have any friends. If you're a race conscious white person who's worried about the great replacement, none of these people actually care about that. You might care about them, but it's never reciprocated. And of course, no one demands reciprocation. They're just so eager, like little dogs, that as soon as somebody pays them the least bit of attention, they just start slobbering all over these people. But there doesn't seem to be any reciprocity. For some of them who like to LARP as like geopolitical masterminds, they imagine that they're engaged in realpolitik. They imagine, maybe they hope, that they're going to get some Putin bucks or
Yeah.
some Iran bucks by taking these positions, and some of them probably are getting money for it. But I think a lot of it is sort of low IQ or overly simplistic thinking, and a lot of it is the wishful thinking that actually they have powerful friends, and we're not basically in this fight practically alone, which is frankly how I think we really are. We're really in this fight practically alone, and white people have to come together and fight this war ourselves. Sam Dixon, whom I've known for years, has been involved in this cause for 50 years, going all the way back to the early 70s. He knew people, and he's known David Duke for most of that time too, but he's been around people who have constantly nursed the idea, the hope that somehow Arabs will kick a little money in the direction of Western critics of Jewish power. And he's been around these people. He's met people like this. He's helped them with, you know, legal work and things like that. And he says it's never gone anywhere. It's never amounted to anything, because a lot of these people in the Arab world are just
You get a
they
pat
see
on the
this as an
back.
opportunity
You get a
to
little pat on the
bilks.
head. That's all you get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of them use it basically as an opportunity to bilk people, basically, to gain allies in a one-way transaction, which is something that you were already describing. But yeah, it's a perennial thing, though. David Duke has basically nursed this illusion for more than 50 years now.
Yeah, and where are the fruits of this alliance? You know, he's been traveling over to these countries, pandering, you know, glazing, and what do you get out of it? Nothing. I mean,
Hmm.
the original version of that was Francis Yaki. I think he went over to Egypt and was doing some propaganda
Hmm.
for them or some crazy shit like that, and what did they do for him in return? Absolutely nothing. They just sent him home, and then he committed suicide. So yeah, this has been a far right, like shibboleth kind of wet dream project for so long. I mean, this has been going on for 50 years. These people have been pushing this and are still on the hamster wheel in 2025 doing the same shit, using the same talking points.
80 years. I mean,
Yeah.
80 years. Ever since the end of the Second World War, there were
And
basically fascist exiles from Europe going to the third world and trying to cultivate these contacts. And I don't think it amounted to anything. And even before that, during the Third Reich, there was a whole group of people within the Third Reich who were trying to basically create this idea of an anti-colonial, ally Germany with anti-colonialism. Basically,
yeah.
the white the non-white rebellion against the white imperial colonial world, which was
Yeah.
basically the whole world at the time.
That's
Yeah.
the yeah,
So
that's
it's
the origin. It's Strasserism. He was initially pushing that. Then actually Hitler became a third worldist during the Second World War. Originally he wasn't. You know, you can read Mein Kampf. He's like shitting on India. He's like, we support England subjugating them. But then the war starts going on. He realizes he's got no allies in the West because he's too aggressive. He's too expansionistic, and so his only allies are like brown Muslims and stuff, Japanese. And so he becomes a third worldist. He starts aligning himself with non-European powers so that he can rule over other Europeans. It's just a garbage foreign policy. It's just divisive and nonsensical and destructive to the West. That's what Putin's attempting to do again. Look at the hell he's raining down on Europe with the same type of policy. He's a third worldist, right? He's backed himself into a corner, and so his only allies are China, a bunch of brown Muslims and Africans, and so now he's pandering to them, and you can see him doing multicultural commercials in Russia about how multicultural and diverse Russia really is, and they got Arabic ads now over in Moscow. So this is what happens. They don't view
mhm.
themselves as part of the West. They don't have a pan-European outlook. They're either hyper-sectarian nationalists where they're only for one type of European. That was the Hitler version. That's a failure, and that's divisive, and that leads to this type of third worldism again because you end up picking fights with people who are actually more similar to you. You end up picking fights with the Slavs. You end up
Yeah.
picking fights with people, your neighbors, because, oh, you want their
Hmm.
land and you want to expand. And so these people who are further away from you, okay, maybe they're an ally now, and the people closer to you in proximity are the enemy. And so we're back on this hamster wheel, and you see these same types of people shilling for Russian expansionism, shilling for Islam now. Um,
Hmm.
just reheating the same takes, the same faulty alliances that never work and never play out. And these people are just useful idiots at the end of the day. They're dupes. They're people that are doing pro bono propaganda for people who hate them and who
Yeah.
despise them and want to destroy them at the end of the day.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, the closest parallel to these people within Western societies are the libtards who coddle third world immigrants. Why? Because they are allying themselves with these brown people from the third world that they are helping colonize their societies because they have a beef with other white people who have slightly different political views than they do. Culturally, they're from the same culture, they could be even from the same families, but they have political beefs with one another, and they're so concerned with getting one up on their white neighbors or their white cousins that they're willing to ally with non-whites, not just across the world, but actually implant colonies of these people in their own society. And that's the grand, brilliant liberal scheme, right? We'll fill our countries up with third worlders where they don't care about LGBTQ stuff and they don't care about the arts, or at least our arts, and they don't care about the environment. But once we get all these people, they'll all just vote for what white liberals tell them to do, and we'll finally have utopia. That's their brilliant scheme, and it is quite analogous, oddly enough, to what Hitler was doing with his alliances with the Third World, and what Putin is doing with his alliances with the Third World to this day, this
Yeah, well,
very
in
day.
in Mein Kampf, Hitler says that when Japan and Russia were at war in 1905, that he sided with Japan because he hated the Austrian Slavs more. Okay, you're not even racial. You're not pro-white. You've just rescinded it right there, right? You hate other whites more than these other group of people because you don't want to take their land. You want to take the land of this group of white people. So this is what it ends up happening a lot, and you see this on the right today. I see this in Spain happening as well. People take these bizarre third worldist stances despite claiming to be pro-Western and pro. They use like the regime as like the example of what the West is. No, just a government like the Trudeau government in Canada does not represent the West. The whatever libtard government you can come up with is not the West. It's just a temporary regime. It's the same thing like in Ukraine. The Zelensky government doesn't represent Ukraine as a nation. It's a temporary government. It can be changed. It can be reformed. And so the takeaway is that our job is to fix it, right? Our job is to make it better. Our job is to shift things to the right and fix our governments and change our policies so that our countries are stronger and better. But just turning in on ourselves, like turning against the West as a whole, like as an entity, it's that Dugan shit, right? It's the satanic West. It's this collective punishment, collective guilt tripping for a couple governments in power, and it's not even true of all governments. You got Orban, you got Trump. There's a number of governments in the West that are not even left wing, right? And so yeah, this is all this kind of collective guilt tripping against the West. It's being weaponized in two ways, right? It's the libtards will weaponize it against whites as a whole, to promote white guilt, slavery, colonialism, etc. And then you have the Duguanoid scumbags weaponizing the other way, saying, "Oh, you're all liberals and you're all left wing. You're all a bunch of progressive LGBT freaks." No, that's a number of people in the West, and there's a plenty of people in the West who are against that stuff and fight against it politically. So he's just applying a inverse type of collective guilt to justify mass violence against the West. You saw how they used that against Ukraine, right? You saw the memes
Yeah.
go out. Gay Zelensky, tranny Zelensky versus Chad, Christian Putin. It's just weaponized memes, right?
So first of all, let's see if we have any questions here on entropy, folks. If you would like to chip in and send a super chat, please do it. Sesto Fiora sends $20 and says, "I have $20 to spare for separation." That's a reference to a fundraiser by Jade Chambers. Thank you very much. Rory writes in with $25. Given the events of the last few days, I would like you to A, give your views, read the Russian Volunteer Corps and its commander, Denis Kapustin, and B, discuss at some length your responses to and thoughts about Mark Collette's video covering his thoughts on these topics. So thank you very much for that. That's a good topic. I wanted to talk about that anyway. And we can back up and talk a little bit more about the recent talks, the recent negotiations about the Ukraine war. It's very, very interesting. There's a lot for a big story that came out on the New York Times. It took about 40 minutes for me to read. It was quite long. Just talking about Trump's Ukraine policies and negotiations from the beginning of his term to the present day. It's not behind their paywall, so I recommend you read it. You could also read it on archive.is or whatever the address is. It's very, very useful. It didn't tell me anything that I couldn't already infer just by looking at the news, but there were some details there about say, conflicts within the administration that were useful. But the bottom line is that the recent talks that Putin, not Putin, that Trump had with Zelensky were interrupted basically by Putin making a phone call or saying, Zelensky tried to drone my palace. Okay. Now, Putin has Trump's number, right? Because Trump is a real estate developer and Trump likes big glitzy residences. Trump likes palaces. And Trump's philosophy is that, a man's palace is his castle, right? You don't go messing, you don't go droning a man's palace. I mean, well, what's the world coming to when people who live in palaces could get droned, right? Just because they started a war. And so Trump got a little ticked off about this. And it was absurd because no evidence was presented that there was an actual drone strike. But even if it had happened, the underlying assumption that somehow Putin is not a legitimate target, given that he started this war, is absurd. There's this layer upon layer of mendacity in this thing, and it's now all completely evaporated. But it seemed to have set back these negotiations a bit. But I think it's dawning on Trump now, although it dawned on him briefly during the talks in Alaska, that the main obstacle to peace is that Putin doesn't want peace. And this seems to have finally dawned on him now. He referred to the way that the Russians are fighting in Ukraine as primitive. Just today, basically, or yesterday, in the aftermath of the Maduro special military operation, which really does put the Russians to shame. The Russians have reverted back to like World War I tactics. They're sending men out on horseback now. They even have camels now, believe it or not. As Russia has been reverting to animal transport and um, and the United States is pulling off this high-tech operation. Of course, the Ukrainians are using drones, and our drone warfare is evolving rapidly. And the primary innovators of this are the Ukrainians at this point. So I think this is all pointing in a good direction, that Trump is realizing that he's not going to be able to negotiate an end to this war unless Putin is forced to suffer more. And when Hegseth and Vance, to their shame, to my dismay, with their alt-right memed-based outlook, were basically sabotaging the supply of munitions to Ukraine. The CIA was basically operating independently of them. And the CIA was helping them ramp up their attacks on the oil infrastructure in Russia, and that has played a huge role, I think, in degrading the ability of Russia to make this war. So I think we're coming to a point where the United States is probably going to be shifting towards a more pro-Ukraine stance, and I think that's a good thing, because that's the only realistic thing. The only way that you're going to get this war to end without Russia without Russia basically absorbing Ukraine, is to support the Ukrainians and to continue to degrade Russia's ability to fight until they finally give up.
And
Unfortunately, they are very,
degrade their
yeah,
allies as well,
yeah,
who are
yeah,
supplying them.
and yeah, and Maduro has been taken off the board. I know there are plenty of other reasons for doing this, but I think, put it this way: the fact that he is Putin's friend didn't count at all in his favor. It didn't weigh one bit in favor of postponing this or calling this
Mm.
off. And I do think that's important. Now, let's talk a bit about Dennis Kapustin. Uh, I'll let you share your thoughts on this. I think it was a great story. I'll just say that. But what are your thoughts on the Kapustin story?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a roller coaster. I thought he was killed. I mean, everyone thought he was killed. I guess just one. All it took was putting out one post on Telegram, and you've confirmed somebody's dead with no proof. Everybody fell for it. We were all posting like eulogies and stuff to Kapustin, and apparently it was some kind of psyop against the Russians. The Russians had put out a hit on him for obvious reasons. He's the leader of a volunteer unit that's been fighting against Russian forces directly on the battlefield. And they seem like a pretty advanced unit. I think they've almost been integrated into the Ukrainian military. They worked with the Ukrainian military on this specific operation, and they faked his death in order to cash in 500,000 rubles, the amount of money that the Kremlin was putting out for his death.
It's
Yeah.
500,000 rubles won't get you gelato. I think it was like the equivalent of
Okay.
$500,000, which
500,000.
is actually
Yeah.
pretty significant. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this is a big propaganda win from their perspective in Ukraine. Obviously, like the day to day situation and on the front line has not been great for Ukraine for a number of years now. They've had a lot of losses. It's been kind of stuck at the 2023 lines that they have, and they haven't made too much progress. I think the Ukrainians lost Kursk. I might be wrong about that, but they took Kursk and then they may have lost part of that. So, I mean, this is good for morale. It boosts morale. And they outsmarted the Russian intelligence, who are pretty bumbling, I must say. The Russian authorities, the military. I mean, we've seen throughout this entire war that they're extremely incompetent. I mean, they were talking about a 3-day war that's now a 4-year war. Meanwhile, Trump does a 3-day operation or a 1-day operation in Venezuela to take him down with minimal
A
casualties.
3 hour
Three
operation.
hour,
Yeah.
yeah, 3 hour op, and Maduro is on a plane, and yet the Russians have been unable to take out Zelensky in any meaningful way. They've been able to take territory for sure. It's not like they've made zero gains, but been a pretty catastrophic failure overall as far as their intentions there. So yeah, my hat's off to him. I've spoken to him briefly. I've tried to get him on my show a few times. He's obviously he's hard to get in touch with, but my hat's off to him. I mean that's an incredible operation, and hopefully there's many more like it.
Yeah, I agree. I have never met him in person, at least not that I recall. Um, I was in Kiev in 2018, and I don't think he was there at the time because I asked about him. But my recollection is bad because I'm one of these people whose Dunbar number is kind of low. So, and I was meeting lots and lots of people at the time. I was literally in rooms with hundreds of people, or in a march with tens of thousands of people, for that matter. So, but I did do an interview with him in 2019 or 2020, and the guy's a legend. He's very intelligent, and he's also a fighter, and so he's a big mixed martial arts fighter, and he's a white nationalist. He's also a real entrepreneur, and so he created the White Rex clothing brand, and he created this thing called the Reconquista Club in Kiev. Now, the one of the events that I attended in 2018 was at the Reconquista Club. And I was staying in this little Airbnb type flat that had no hot water the whole time it was there. And anyway, I got a cab. I had the address, and I got a cab, and I gave the address to the cab driver, just the address, and he said, sort of, ho ho ho, Reconquista. So he knew it from the address, which I thought was interesting, and so we got to this sort of agglomeration of modern buildings, and he pulled up, and here it was, this thing, and I walked in. It was this huge facility on 2 floors, and they had a big mixed martial arts ring on the ground floor. Plus, they had it was set up for a conference there that I spoke at. And then below it, on the lower level, they had a restaurant and lounge. It was really nice, and the food was excellent too. And it was just very well appointed. The decor, the design was extremely impressive. There's just a lot of attention to detail, and this was Dennis's business. This was one of his businesses, and they had all these tables set up from various meta-political groups and booksellers selling stuff, which I thought was interesting. I met some very cool people there, a guy from Casa Pound, people from France and other countries. My guide, Sergei Zaikovsky, who was working on translating my book, the White Nationalist Manifesto, into Ukrainian, was there, and he was my guide during the whole trip, and he was later killed in like the first month of the war in 2022. So there were some good people there, and some of them have died now in battle because of this stupid invasion of Putin's. But I was tremendously impressed with the people there, because they were extremely serious and militant people who had actually faced death. It wasn't an online LARP. They'd
Yeah.
actually faced death. And this conflict that was going on in eastern Ukraine, which was sort of frozen at the time, I mourned the whole idea of it happening and everything, but I started to get the sense that this was a very important conflict in terms of the genesis of racial nationalism, militant racial nationalism in Ukraine as a political movement. Before uh, the operations in the East, these fake people's republics to Donetsk and Luhansk and all that stuff in 2014, a lot of these people were involved in things like mixed martial arts and National Socialist black metal and that kind of stuff. It was a cultural thing. Some of them were soccer hooligans, right? But the war really galvanized them into a political force, and it was very impressive. And it's very much a legit backstory that you find in fascism, in, well, Italian fascism, also the conservative revolution and National Socialism, all that in interwar Germany. A lot of these people were military veterans who were radicalized by their experiences in the military and after the military. And so I saw this as a kind of crucible for racial nationalism. And of course, Azov started out as basically as a militia that was being funded by basically rich people in eastern Ukraine, including some Jews, apparently, who basically didn't want to be looted by Russia. Uh, and so they found these toughs and bought weapons for them, and they organized and became a fighting force. Again, that is sort of a very classic story of how fascist movements formed, for instance, in Italy, for instance. So yeah, I was very impressed with a lot of these people, and I was impressed with what he had accomplished, and I think very very highly of him. I met a lot of, I would say, he wasn't one of them, but certainly half a dozen people that I talked to at some length during my time there were Russians, not Russian speakers of Ukrainian ethnicity, but Russian Russians from Russia, who were Russian ethno-nationalists who have been forced to flee Russia for Ukraine because their type was being gulagged, basically, by Putin. And it was very clear to me why they were why they were in Ukraine. And they looked at Ukraine as, a refuge for them, for one thing. But they also looked at Ukraine sort of in the way that somebody like T.S. Eliot from the United States looked at the UK or England, as their original civilization, the fount of their civilization, right? And they felt that Russia had lost something from Ukraine, that they had lost something. Specifically, they felt that they had been mutated by Byzantium, the sort of Byzantine despotic model and the despotism of the Mongol hordes. And it had made them less Western, less free, less free-minded, and they looked at Ukraine as a place where they it was a source of their civilization, and it had things that they felt that Russia had lost. And I could completely relate to that. I thought that was very interesting just to hear these tales.
Yeah,
A lot of them had this attitude about the Donetsk and Luhansk stuff that just sort of brought me up short. Their attitude was just casually, dogmatically, oh, these people are Bolsheviks. They just get bullets for Bolsheviks. No, let's next topic. There was just no question about it. There was well, maybe it's a mixed. No, these people are communists. They deserve to die, which I was taken back by a bit. But when the war proper started and they started flying the Soviet banner and putting up monuments to Lenin and Stalin in conquered territory, there is something really weird about re-Bolshevization happening in Russia today. And I find that, at least on the symbolic plane, I find that very disturbing.
I believe he grew up in Germany as well. I think he's like half German, and he was involved in some of the football hooligan scene in Germany and in Russia. I believe he knew that
I
guy called
think,
Tesak, who was a
yeah,
Russian
Tesak, yeah, who was
kind of.
murdered in prison.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was like a
skinhead,
performative.
basically.
Yeah, he was like a performative skinhead who did stunts in public and stuff. I mean, there's a
Did
degenerate.
entrapment stuff for pedophiles, and yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's a degenerate element to the hooligan kind of skinhead scene for sure, but I think he over the years he very much matured into something better than that, right?
Well, yeah, and
Some of those
that's the
people,
thing with Bieletsky too, in Azov. I mean, the thing
yeah,
is that they started out in this, but they're very smart people. They're smart people and capable of organizing things.
hmm
And so they started there, and it created pretty impressive accomplishments. And I respect that. I tremendously
yeah,
respect it. Dennis's family, or they both came from Russia. He was born in Russia.
okay,
They came to Germany before the collapse of communism under some kind of refuge policy for Russian Jews. And this is something that's been used against him. There's a Der Spiegel story about this. I think Der Spiegel was the thing that broke that. And they confronted his mother with this, and she said she was Russian. Now, I don't know if that's an evasion or it's the truth. I do know that many people left Russia for Germany, Israel, and other countries claiming to be Jews who actually weren't Jews. They were just trying to get free of Russia. And Israel has a significant number of people who emigrated there in the 80s who are not actually Jewish. And this is sort of an odd thing that they've got to deal with there. So he could be in that camp.
yeah.
I just don't know.
Even if it's true, I mean, he's someone who identifies as Russian. He identifies with Western civilization. I mean, there are some Jews like that, right? There's even
Yeah, yeah.
some full
I mean,
on people in the American Renaissance like that, like Michael Levin, right? He wrote that book, Why Race Matters. So I mean, that's not out of
Mhm.
the cards. I mean, that's something that's happened. So yeah, I mean,
It's
yeah, but
not
the
impossible.
schizos,
It's not inconceivable. Yeah,
but like the
but
schizos would like my position is that if like there are some Ashkenazis that actually want the West to thrive and want it to be a strong civilization and don't want this multiculturalism. So why stop them? I mean, isn't that what we want? I mean, isn't that good? Don't we want more people to come to that side? And if some of those people that have money and have clout and are professionals want to help, so be it. I mean, what's wrong with that? So
well,
yeah.
my response to a lot of people like that, when people were talking about Eric Zemmour, for instance, I, I my attitude towards Zemmour is this: um, it is not anything against Eric Zemmour that he has stood up for the French better than most French have stood up for themselves. That's
Yeah.
not to his shame or his discredit. That's to the discredit of the French. It's to the discredit of Marine Le Pen that she's allowed Eric Zemmour to be a more principled advocate for the French than she is in some ways. Um, and
Mhm.
so yeah, my that's my attitude. If there are some Jews who want to use their magic Jew powers and insider, Jewish insider powers and things to actually help, I'm not going to, get in their way.
Right.
I'm
It's
not sure,
the only people who would get
it's
in their way are people that have the pathological mind rot that say they're all collectively guilty of stuff. That those people will say that, right? But
right.
I don't believe that. I
Yeah.
mean, there's plenty of white European Nordic people who are communists and who hate the West and who work against the West, or just liberals, or just progressives, and at the end of the day, like the majority of those people aren't going to be white. They're just the majority of the people in power doing these things, like the Trudeaus and Merkels and Bidens and Clintons. And these are white Europeans. These are full on white Europeans with Christian backgrounds doing the shit that we don't like. So the idea that it's like only one group of people responsible is just totally wrong. There's plenty of Christian organizations that are at the forefront of refugee resettlement into the West. I mean, they're actually the majority of those organizations. So this hyper focusing thing is just cherry picking. I mean, there's so many. There's plenty of enemies out there from different backgrounds, and there's like a faction of left wing progressive Jews that are problematic. But there's also a faction of left wing progressive Christians that are problematic, and blacks and other minorities that also have their factions doing the same types of stuff. So there are many enemies, and Islam's not an ally. Third world communists, brown third world communists, are not an ally. They don't help us. But some right wing Jews are. They can be an ally. Now, my stipulation of that would be like, well, you have to put the West first. Forget about Israel. That's a whole different thing. Like if you want to be a Zionist, well, okay, well you go there. If you want to help the West, well, defend the West, and you have to put it first. That's the stipulation that I would put out, and they should stop identifying as Jewish and with that culture, with that civilization, and start identifying more with the West. And actually, Zemmour said that. He says that he firstly identifies as French, and he's like got a very weak kind of J identity. He doesn't really talk about that issue so much. Now, there's some other people that someone like Laura Loomer, she's kind of in between. Like she's got this hardcore J identity, but also she's pro-white and she just defends even an ethno nationalist stance. I would say to her, well, you got to pick. You can't one or the other, right? So there's some like that, but there are also some that are better than her and have a better stance than her. So things are more complicated than the meme tards want to tell you. And we have to broaden our perspective here and always put first what's best for the West. That should be the number one consideration before any of the other
Mhm.
stuff.
My reaction was, well, either it's not true about his background, or if it is true, then it's really to our discredit, not his discredit, that a Jew from Russia has done so much for white nationalists. And I do believe he did a lot for white nationalists. And at the time, I believe that he was dead. And well, I can't ask him about this. I couldn't ask him about this, but his life was over, and you have to judge him by his deeds. And I thought, well, his deeds are quite impressive. And now that he's back and has helped fleece the Russians of $500,000 and humiliate Russian intelligence. I mean, the entire war has been a humiliation for Russian intelligence, but this is a great op. This will stand as sort of the symbol of Russian intelligence failure vis-a-vis Ukraine for all time to come. I reached out after he announced his resurrection, and I'd love to do an interview with him, and I'll ask him about all this stuff. He'll clarify it. I don't think he would hem and haw about it. But anyway, I'm very very happy that this happened, and it's tremendous news. I was genuinely saddened to hear about his death. And I was genuinely happy to hear that he's back. And I had a bit of Schadenfreude at the thought of the people who were chuckling over his death, being disappointed. Because I think it's always in bad taste to mock the dead, even if they're your enemies. I'm somewhat superstitious about that, maybe, but given the fact that we all die, it's like it's not something that I particularly want to mock. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Okay, nothing new. That's people are all given out because we're doing a fundraiser up to the end of the year. That's fine. I have a question uh, about the Maduro extraction, the Venezuelan op, in connection with international law. There's a whole lot of discussion about international law that's been sparked by this. First of all, some of it's just hilarious. Apparently, Russia has announced that they are deeply concerned about this operation because it's a violation of international law.
Yeah, of
And
course.
people people are just going off and just laughing at this. It's like, well, I guess all the cynics about international law do have a point. Uh,
Yeah,
the
the
people are saying, "Uh-oh,
tactical
yeah,
application
yeah,
of international law. That's always been Russia's gambit. Is international law matters when our enemies do things that we can use against them. When our enemies violate international law, we care about it. When we violate international law, we don't care about it. And sure, America has the same double standard. Every country pretty much does. But the Russians are
yeah."
particularly obnoxious about it as they're killing thousands of people, kidnapping hundreds of thousands of children and shipping them to Russia to re-educate them, killing women and children, raping their soldiers, are committing rapes and thefts and all kinds of outrages. And then they just do this thing where they're like, well, what about that thing over there? It's just another, it's almost like good for him because he just uses it as a distraction point. It's just like, when Israel and Palestine war kicked off, Lavrov, he took full advantage and he says, hey, those people criticizing us for our casualties in Ukraine, well, what about Israel? They've killed like 2, 3 times the people we've killed, so we're not so bad. Don't be too hard on us. So the real distraction is that issue. They're taking attention away from where it should be, which is here in Europe.
Yeah, I believe that there is a meaningful concept of international law, and
Mm.
I would like to, I don't want to have wars like this. I would like to avoid this. I've come to a greater appreciation of international law, basically by dealing with the war bros, the Conan bros. On the right, who basically think that any notion of international law is just some sort of weak, simpering, meaningless concept. It's like, no, it. really isn't meaningless because every nation is vulnerable. And this is the a very cynical argument that Hobbes gives for why all men are equal. All men are equal according to Hobbes, not because of some spark of divinity in them, some bit of human dignity, some you know something mystical, uh, or because they really are equal in all their capacities and their achievements and things like that. All that's rubbish. All men are equal because no man is bulletproof. You may One of my teachers, his name was Glenn Daly. He taught political theory courses when I was an undergraduate, and I loved his classes. We were doing Hobbes's Leviathan, and he basically boiled it down like this. He said, "You might be big and tough, but you got to sleep sometime. And when you do, a bunch of skinny guys will get together and shank you." And that's human equality for Hobbes. And given that we are equal in the sense that we're all vulnerable to death, we have to come down off our high horse and we have to say, okay, we can't go through life the way young Trayvon Martin wanted to go through life as a quote unquote no limit nigga, right? Uh, because you soon discover, as Trayvon did, that if you go through life that way, that you're vulnerable. People will, fight back, and therefore it behooves us, even if we have no compunctions about violence, right? Even if we don't think that people have rights or people have dignity or life has any worth, the very fact that if you go through life just preying upon other people, that they're eventually going to get together and strike back is the basis for coming up with laws and norms to try and make, live peaceably with one another. And for Hobbes, it was basically putting a figure in charge, the sovereign, who has the power to enforce laws. But in the international realm, he points out that there is no sovereign. Every state in the international realm is in a state of nature. There's no overarching force. But because it's so dangerous to basically just allow lawlessness, piracy, uh, and things like that run amok, we've developed international law. And so you have these treaties and things like that. Um, the Treaty of Westphalia was a huge thing that ended the 30 Years' War. And they set down certain basic concepts of like the sovereign state, the equality of sovereign states. Why are sovereign states all equal under international law? Well, they're equal in the Hobbesian sense because even the biggest world power is not invulnerable if all the other countries that tire of their shenanigans band together and come at them. So it's in everybody's interest to have some kind of, I guess, overarching bodies where you can come together and mediate disputes, settle things without war, without violence, make it possible to have productive trade and diplomatic relations. And this has evolved for hundreds of years into what we call international law. And yes, there's no international court of law. There's no, well, there are courts, but there's no international sovereign that stands over all of us and forces
Right.
us to do it. But it does actually play a positive role, and
Yeah,
it
it's not
shouldn't be
bad.
trifled with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a
it's
bad
not a
thing.
horrible thing. And so, but then the question is, well, what Trump did is against international law. Okay, maybe it is. We need to adjudicate that.
Hmm.
Uh, but the there are actual questions. Instead of just dismissing the whole thing as some gay idea, some gay liberal modern idea, let's actually have a dispute about it. Let's take it seriously. But it's interesting, in our sphere, a large number of people are just going off and saying this proves that there's no such thing as international law. It's like, no, that doesn't really follow.
There
And
is there is. It's
I
just
yeah,
selectively applied. Of course, all the big
yeah,
powers get to breach international law because they're big powers, and the small powers tend not to be able to do so. So most of the people that have been convicted in the ICC, I believe, were like these middle powers, like these
right,
Serbian war criminals and African war criminals and stuff like that.
right,
Whereas no American, no Russian has ever been brought before these
hmm
courts.
right,
But yeah, it's a good framework. Like the Nuremberg trial after World War II, basically the main thing was that they committed a conspiracy of aggression, invading and occupying other countries for your own gain, purely for your own gain. It is bad, and yeah, it is. It's caused the two greatest bloodbaths in the history of the West have been based on these kind of actions, and it's still there, and countries are still doing it, and it would be good if they all followed international law, but
hmm
that's probably not going to happen
the,
anytime
the,
soon.
yeah. But part of the problem is that people don't understand what a norm is. Laws
Hmm.
are norms. Okay, they're not facts. So what does this mean? A norm sets up a distinction between good and bad. Uh, and so international law basically says things like it's wrong to invade other countries. It doesn't make it impossible for people to invade other countries, just like the idea of human rights doesn't make you bulletproof, right? Uh, the idea that, oh, well, there are wars, therefore there's no international law, is as invalid as the idea of, well, there are rapes, therefore there are no laws against rape, right? You say, yes, there are norms that proscribe these as bad things, but that doesn't mean that these bad things don't happen. But what it allows us to do is to classify these things as bad, as abhorrent, and therefore take action to try and prevent them, and also to try and punish them when they take place. That's the meaning of a norm. Uh, Norms, if something is a norm, it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It means that it's a bad thing that happens all the time, and that we try to basically lessen. We want to lessen the occurrence of it and ameliorate it when it does occur, and punish the people who do it. That's what a law is. That's what a norm is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, you could say no law exists then because people don't follow the law. That's true of every country. Many people don't follow the law. Many people don't follow the international law, but it is there. It does exist, and it can be prosecuted in an international court. So it is real. But it's difficult to get. Basically, you have to lose a war to be
Mhm.
brought in front of these tribunals. You have to lose a war pretty badly and have all of your power taken away from you. So if, like, for example, Putin loses the war in Ukraine and gets overthrown in Russia, and some other guy that is Putin's enemy comes into power and is very happy to give him up, then he'll probably go to the international court. But unless that actually happens, it's unlikely. But it is a good framework. I support like just countries sticking to their own borders, not dealing with each other amicably through trade, through negotiation. If you need some oil, well, let's trade for it. If you need some grain, well, let's trade for it. I think that's a better way to do things than just invade each other and take it, which has led to these bloodbath uh,
Mhm.
catastrophes that we've seen, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, and it's maybe that's
all these wars,
libtard.
events.
Yeah, they're gonna
Yeah,
call us
go.
libtards for saying that, but no, it's just I want to see the West thrive, and that's why I'm a pan-European and not just a uh, particularist for one specific European
Mhm.
group. I would be just as against Spain just randomly deciding to occupy Portugal for no reason other than they wanted to take it than I am for Russia invading Ukraine, because I do want to see
Right.
Europeans live well and thrive and not be mass murdered. Right? Isn't that what we all want?
Oh, that's so gay and liberal. That's the attitude of a
Yeah,
lot of these people,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I just don't agree with that either. We I I do think that the attempt to create international law, things like the United Nations, things like the League of Nations, things like the International Criminal Courts, treaty organizations like NATO and so forth, are all attempts to fix a serious problem. And the serious problems really resulted in the two greatest bloodbaths that our civilization has suffered, the First and Second World War. We really do want to avoid that. And uh, the Ukraine war is a terrible thing because it is a return of large scale war to Europe. And I was very touched and pleased at the number of Europeans, regardless of their political leanings or stated preferences, whose first reaction to this was just horror. Even in countries like, like Romania or like Hungary, that have little historical grudges against the Ukrainians, the overwhelming reaction was, "This is a horrible thing. War has returned to Europe. This is a terrible thing." And I like that. I do not agree with the glorification of war. I've spent a lot of time reading human history and studying, and most of history is just wars, wars and art and religion, right? Um, and the art and religions and cultures get constantly consumed by war, sadly. And if you just spend enough time reading about the history of war and the usually trivial and silly basis for it and the catastrophic consequences, it just creates a distaste for it.
Yeah,
I think we should have a distaste for this.
none of these people who glorify specific cases of war do it across the board. So, like, let's say the Hitler stands, the Hitler fans will glorify his wars and his invasions, and the Caesar. He's Caesar, man. He's a real emperor type guy. But then if it was the reverse, if it was Stalin invading Germany and doing what he wants with Germany, oh, how horrible, that evil bastard Stalin, right? And it's the same, with wars that Putin launches a war. Oh, what a base Chad, what a great Caesar imperialist. And then when Israel bombs Gaza, they're up in arms, and suddenly they're appealing to human rights again. Suddenly, and in that case was not even really imperialism. It was just a response to October 7th. And in other cases like this, 3-hour operation in Venezuela, up in arms. So none of it's applied consistently. No one has a consistent standard on that. I try to be as consistent as I can, but obviously it's difficult in these complex geopolitical situations. But yeah, I find that distasteful when they selectively glorify imperialism, but then tactically morph into an anti-imperialist when it's a specific country they don't like
Right.
doing the thing, right?
So there are people in our sphere who are liking what Trump did, and they're also doing the might makes right thing. Well, this is great power politics. And I think that that's very bad, for the simple reason that if might makes right, then every time a migrant rapes a European, that's right too. People want to say, people are willing to say things on the macro level with states that they would never say on the micro level with individuals within their own community,
Right. They give
right?
superpowers to the
Uh,
state. The state's a different entity. It can do things that you can as an individual.
yeah. And I think we gain absolutely nothing from this might makes right idea, especially given that dissidents are powerless. We are powerless. Self consciously white Europeans are powerless in our own societies, and we are targeted by colonizers and invaders and haters of our own race for that matter. We are powerless. And if we say that moral talk is just a lot of bunk. Well, how do you expect to get out of this situation if we have no money and no states, no power, no state power? The only thing that's left to us is to talk our way out of it, and the only real tool is moral suasion. And if you just dismiss the whole realm of norms and just say, which is basically what the might makes right idea is, it's like whatever powerful people say is right, which means that there's no criterion of right. It's just bunk. Morality is bunk. You've surrendered really the only tool that we've got to talk our way out of this mess that we're in. And all of our success, basically, has been talk to motivate people to band together and organize to awaken people to the problems that we face. It's all talk. So it really bothers me that some people are just willing to say, none of that matters.
Well, they say might makes right only in the specific cases where they think it's good for them, but then it's not right when it's some government doing it that they hate. So if it might makes right, then why are they critiquing Israel uh, occupying Gaza and just wiping it out? I mean, that would be might makes right, but they're not for that. They're not for might makes right when it's the other team that's doing the might. Might makes, but doesn't make right. It might like it's just a reality, right? That doesn't mean it's right though. We shouldn't just cheer it because it is the power that's there and enforcing its will on somebody else. It doesn't make it right at all. And it really depends on the situation. Like with this thing in Venezuela. I mean, Maduro. I mean, there's questions about his legitimacy, the elections being rigged. I mean, he did kill many Venezuelans in protest, so there's some issues there. There's some narco trafficking accusations, which may, under international law, delegitimize him as a leader. So there's it's more complex than just it's against international law in this case, but whatever. I mean, I don't particularly care about Venezuela. Very few people died in this operation. It was a pretty clean cut thing. Maduro supports Putin invading Ukraine, so I'm not going to really shed a tear for the guy. He's someone that does the might makes right, but tactically himself, right? So who gives a damn if he's rotting in a American prison cell? So that's my take.
Yeah, it's so funny. A lot of people have been pointing this out that it's extraordinary that the US can just do stuff to people like Maduro, but we can't do anything within our own borders to deal with similarly criminal people. Or for that matter, we knock off this third worldist Marxist in Venezuela and have just sworn in a third worldist Marxist as mayor of New York City. It really is quite paradoxical, but I mean, there's a reason for this, and that's that the U.S. president has these powers outside his borders that he doesn't have within his borders, basically.
It's just how the system has been set up. There's been a division of powers in America, and so like he can't necessarily make every decision of every state as far as domestic policy goes. He has to, he's tied up with judges and activist judges, and there's all that stuff. But when it comes to foreign policy, he has more control, right? So that's just the nature of the American system and how it's set up. Unfortunately, it is that way. I mean, I wish he had like a magic wand and can, get rid of Mamdani and deport everybody, but it's just not how it is. But I do think that the Orban type of model is the way forward. I guess this would be if we can round up now because I gotta go. But like I tell people who come at me like, what's the solution and what can we do? And you got all these people who push this nonsensical accelerationism, but that's been tried, and these guys have been just roasted by the feds like every time. And there's no revolution in countries in Europe that have no guns, right? And Europe is completely disarmed as a continent, so that's not going to fly. it really has to be this Orban type of takeover. It's just like kind of infiltrate the system, play the by the rules to get in, and then just kind of rig the game once you're in. And that's what Orban does. I think he even coined some new phrase called like authoritarian democracy or something like that. Like you get in, you get control, and then you just rig the game so you keep getting back in. And that seems to be the only thing that's worked. What else has worked? I mean, these guys have been brainstorming for 70 years about how do we get power, and let's just start we'll start another group, and then blah, blah, like it just goes on and on, right? You have to, on some level, play within the system's rules because that's the system that's there. It's not going to disappear overnight unless you like this whole LARP about civil war and this stuff. It's just a fantasy. I mean, Spain had a civil war in 1936 during a very tumultuous time when Franco tried to do a coup, and he was the head of the military himself, or he was a general, so he had forces like the circumstances are completely different today. Like that's not going to happen again. And so I see a lot of these LARPy type groups, including here in Spain, that just want to do this nostalgia thing. It's just look to the past, They always go off on these tangents about the Régimen de 78. We just have to go back to 1978 and get the Franco dictatorship back. And it's not coming back. It's gone. Like, it's silly to just be hung up on that. It's like those Confederates just LARPing around in cosplay. So it has to be, I think we have to move forward. We have to look at what's in front of us, see what's possible, and do it that way. Get involved in the political parties, get involved in the institutions. Yeah, maybe you have to start a new political party. That's totally possible in Europe. I mean, there have been new parties that have just popped up that won seats in the parliament, right? In Spain, that's happened with Vox. They're the third largest party. Before that, they had no seats in the parliament. They, had no support, and now they're the third largest party and are growing and probably will win the next election. So these things are totally possible, but too many people are getting derailed into this weird kind of schizo stuff where they think there's no solutions, and they're preaching that openly. But if my response is, well, if there's no solutions, then what the hell are you doing, man? Just go back to
Yeah.
your 9 to 5 and shut up about politics because there's no solutions. So
Yeah, if there's no political solution, a lot of that's just venting, but a lot of it is basically putting the premise in place for violence. And this is why I have zero tolerance for that meme. There's no political solution. If I see these people, I'll put it this way. I give them a dim reception, a cool reception. So yeah, we're almost out of time. I do think that Orban's got some problems, but generally I think he's the best politician in Europe. And he has a good model. He calls it illiberal democracy. Liberal democracy basically means rule by minorities and foreign interest groups. And we don't want that. We want actual people power. And what he calls illiberal democracy really is kind of populism delivering on what democracy should deliver on, which is what the people really want. He's been very effective because he gives the people pretty much what they want. Of course, everyone wants more, and you can always want more from the government, which is how the left basically gains power and then totally debauches societies. But he's given a lot of what people want, a lot of the deliverables, the actually deliverable stuff he's been able to deliver. And that's good. Prosperity, security, peace. Uh, Hungary could be a lot richer, but they started way behind. They had the Second World War and decades of communism after it. And uh, the country was just trashed. And given how far behind they were, they've come forward really quite well, and a lot of it's been under his regime. So he deserves a lot of credit. I think that yes, we need illiberal democracies or nationalist populist regimes, but they have to find ways of staying in power, and that's the thing that I worry most about with Trump. Because if the left gets back into power in the United States, they're going to try and put an end to American democracy. They already indicated that they were willing to do this by basically stealing the 2020 election because they just thought that the right is too dangerous to be allowed to have power and it doesn't matter who gets the most votes. If you think that way, democracy's over. The right needs to start thinking that way as well. They need to keep these leftists out of power and they need to build a secure power base, and then they need to keep delivering. The trouble is, of course, that as soon as politicians get security in their jobs, they start basically getting corrupt. And that is a problem that you have to face. There has to be the possibility of loss uh, to keep these people honest, to keep them accountable. And that is a problem. But the left has so screwed up society that if there's any chance of turning things around and saving Western civilization, they have to be kept out of power for a long, long time because it's going to take a decade to basically undo the damage that the left can do in a year in power. And things have gotten so bad, we just cannot afford to allow these freaks to regain the controls of society. It just cannot be allowed to happen. In fact, there's a whole lot more purging of the left from institutions that needs to happen. And one of the good things about Orban is he has purged the left, not just from government, but from a lot of cultural institutions, including universities and NGOs in his country. And that's a very important thing.
Yeah, he banned Soros. He shut down his university. I mean, he's done a lot of good things. Those things need to be done if we're to compete with them because they're very good at that. They're good at fundraising. They're good at indoctrination. They're good at getting in the media and pushing their narratives. And same here in Spain, the leftists, they've been very successful at taking over the institutions. That long march, that Gramsci model, take over the cultural institutions and the unis, and then eventually into politics. And they keep pushing their shit. And they're extremely obnoxious and demanding what they want. And we gotta meet their energy. We gotta have the same energy. Now I'm starting a group this year called Identidad España. I think it's kind of time I start some IRL type of group instead of just making content. People, of course, will demand this of you, right? If you are a content creator, they'll be like, "Yeah, well, where's your IRL stuff?" Blah, blah, blah. But so I'm making a group. There are some groups in Spain that already exist, right wing, even far right groups, but I don't necessarily like a lot of their methods. They're a bit too cosplay, bad optics and stuff, right? So, and the problem is if there's a group that already exists, you kind of just have to kowtow to whatever the leadership there is promoting. They get to set the tone. There's probably going to be some disagreements on some issues. So I'd rather start my own group and try to attract just a higher caliber of people. I noticed when I moved away from the wignatty stuff, when I was into that stuff, the caliber of people that were attracted to my work was just low caliber. It was just rebellious teenager types, unhinged types, emotionally volatile, lower IQ and stuff. I just don't think there's that much utility in those people. They end up it just becomes some Jerry Springer shit show. And so I think we need to appeal to higher brow people in college, people who are professionals, people who have high education levels, because those people are smart and they can get things done and they can, influence the way that the others can't. I'm not saying that we should appeal to nobody that is like, in the trades or something. Like, no, I'm just saying that they have to be well put together. You have to look at people's character as well. I think one of the flaws of the whole WN scene is that they've had a very low bar for a very long time. Their bar is super low. As long as you just mouth the 6 talking points, right? The race realism, race IQ. As long as you got a couple of the points down, you're in, man. No, you're just gonna let in a whole bunch of screwballs and weirdos and degenerates and criminals and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've seen it personally. I've seen these types of people. And I noticed that when they put on that skin suit, that holier than thou skin suit, it's usually coming from like the hyper Christians or like the hyper Natsocky Nazi types. They always skin suit this thing like they're like the purest of pure and they're always purity spiraling. But when you really dig into it, there's some major problems with them, personal flaws, criminality going on, and stuff like that. So that's sort of my 2026 project. It's a lot of work though. I didn't like. I'm not that well versed in IRL activism, but it's difficult to find people that are committed, that really want to do it. You know, some people will show up one time and then just forget about it. You know, there's a lot of kind of people that are 1 foot in it and 1 foot not in it. People are lazy. So that's the difficult part, is finding like committed people who really are interested and really want to change things and really want to get things done. But somebody's got to do it, right? If you don't like what you're seeing out there, you got to do it yourself at some point. So that's sort of my 2026 thing. And I met a lot of these people like Martin Sellner. He's kind of the model I'm going off of. He started a lot of IRL groups. He's done a lot of activism, and I'm kind of basing it off of his model. And there's a number of other groups in Europe, like the one in Portugal. This guy, Afonso guy, he's got a good organization and he's very adept and smart. And so I'm looking at those kind of groups as the basis. And yeah, I mean, there's also conferences coming up. There's another remigration summit coming up in May, I think. I might attend those as well. So there's a lot going on here in Europe. And, you know, I'm optimistic. I'm not one of these doomers who thinks it's all lost and hopeless and we're screwed. And, well, if you think like that, I mean, just go and retire. Like, there's no point in even engaging in this kind of discourse at all. There's no point in doing politics if you think it's all hopeless. It's never hopeless. Of course not. I mean, we're still alive. We're still here. We're still breathing. We still have energy. So things can change if you want them to change, basically.
Yeah, I completely agree. The people who just spend all their time blackpilling online, it's just self-indulgence, frankly. They've mistaken this for a therapy encounter group, and this is politics, not therapy. So, Brandon, I really like your work, and I want people to follow it. I'm very excited about your IRL group. How do people follow your online content, and how do they find out more about this group that you're creating?
So you can follow me on Substack, Martinez Politics that ends in an X.net. That's the Substack. It's the same on Telegram. And the IRL group is called Identidad España, but on Telegram it's Identidad ESP. So we've got it set up. I've already made some posters and stuff, but I'm gonna have to do the heavy lifting to recruit people. But it will be done, and that'll sort of be my pet project for 2026, as well as my usual content. I do a stream twice a week. I still comment on politics. Maybe I'll switch it over to Spanish though, to really ingratiate myself into the Spanish scene, because the thing is, the Spanish scene, these guys don't even pay attention to the the Anglosphere stuff. I was born and raised in Canada, so like, you know, English is my language, and I'm a little bit more tuned into the Anglosphere. But maybe I got to switch over a little bit, switch gears, and just do Spanish content or a mixture of both. But thanks for having me on, Greg.
That
It was a
makes
great
sense.
chat.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, folks, we will be back next week with Sarah Dye of Above Time Coffee Roasters, and we might have another guest as well.